Something has gone seriously wrong with modern American liberalism. I'm Ryan, and I think I know what it is. I was watching an interview of Ezra Klein, a New York Times columnist who is probably at this point one of America's most prominent liberal journalists, by Ross Douthat, another New York Times guy that's more conservative, when I saw this exchange.
I don't think of this as the part of liberalism right now, or the part of the Democratic Party or the left, whatever you want to call it, that is unsolved for. I don't think that we lack stories. I don't think we lack that vision. I know we are not as rooted in religious faith as you would prefer us to be. I think our failures have been elsewhere.
This has been bouncing around in my head ever since I heard it. If I was to ask you, what is the story that the Democratic Party tells, or that liberals in general tell, about American politics, what would you say? No, really, put it in a comment. I'm curious what you think, because I strongly disagree with Ezra Klein here. I think liberalism is lacking a story. I think if you were to ask 3 different liberals that question, you'd get about 15 different answers. And I think this is because, more than just lacking a story, liberalism has lost all sense of itself as an ideology. It's this total destruction of the moral core of liberalism that explains how an ideology of revolutionaries telling each other that they could begin the world over again turned into an ideology that too many people now associate with a repulsive brand of nervous status quoism. Let me explain what I mean. But first, what even is liberalism? There's a lot of definitions. The most popular statement of principles associated with liberalism in the American tradition comes from the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was clearly inspired by Enlightenment-era liberal philosophers like Rousseau and Locke when he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." So if I were to ask again, what is the core essence of liberalism in the American tradition, I think that's just about as good as it gets: a recognition of fundamental equality, a recognition of natural human rights, and an affirmation of popular sovereignty. So what's the problem then? I'm sure Ezra Klein and basically all modern American liberals would agree with the general thrust here. In fact, the Declaration of Independence is so thoroughly woven into our common national story that most Americans wouldn't even recognize it as a product of Enlightenment-era liberal ideology, just wisdom handed down from the founding generation. For a while, this was fine because liberalism was essentially the common playing field of American politics. I think especially after the Cold War, when the last fundamentally different from liberal democracy form of political organization crumbled, it looked like the age of real ideological conflict might be over. From now on, we would be having disagreements mostly about policy, not about fundamental principles. Out of this environment came a whole generation of liberals who saw liberalism as being synonymous not with any hard principles, but with pushing for progressive policy reform because they believed it was best from a technocratic perspective. We can reduce suffering by 15% if we spend 5% more, and we can do that by raising taxes. I don't know if anyone's used this term before, but I'm going to call these people consensus liberals. And I'm going to do so because of a really important work of political philosophy that was published in 1993. John Rawls, just a couple years after the Soviet Union collapsed, published a book called Political Liberalism. I can't go into every bit of Rawls's philosophy here, but he's incredibly influential in political science. Bill Clinton was known to frequently invite him to dinner at the White House, for example. Clinton also called him one of the 20th century's most influential political philosophers, which I think is probably true. One of the big ideas of political liberalism is that politics should be arranged around shared basic values if possible. His idea was that even among people with different worldviews, there could be an overlapping consensus that is supported by most people, even if it's sometimes supported for different reasons. For example, a conservative might support the idea of representative democracy because it's a time-tested system that we've inherited from prior generations. And a liberal might support representative democracy because they believe that representative democracy is the best way to make the government accountable to the people. The liberal and the conservative might disagree about implementation. Maybe the conservative wants to make senators elected by state legislatures again, and maybe the liberal wants to expand the House of Representatives. But these are debates about how best to implement the shared ideal of a representative democracy, not about if we should have a representative democracy at all. The idea was perfectly suited for the era. Here's a section from a speech Bill Clinton gave in 1995.
We have entered a new era. For years out here in the country, the old political categories have basically been defunct, and a new political discussion has been begging to be born. It must be now so in Washington as well. The old labels of liberal and conservative, spender and cutter, even Democrat and Republican, are not what matter most anymore. What matters most is finding practical, pragmatic solutions based on what we know works in our lives and our shared experiences, so that we can go forward together as a nation. Ideological purity is for partisan extremists.
Look, I don't want to just knock down a straw man here. Maybe this was practical politics. Maybe Clinton's object here was to draw a contrast with Newt Gingrich, for example, the Republican congressional leader whose lasting legacy is basically a series of attempts to make the Republican Party more, not less, ideological. Certainly whatever Clinton was selling resonated with voters. Anyone who's being honest about this stuff has to acknowledge that. So, in the interest of not making 90s Clintonism into a sin eater for every problem with the Democrats in 2025, and because we can't go back in time and test a counterfactual, let me just accept Clinton's premise here. Maybe politics without ideology was possible in his time. The relevant question, though, is it still?
Can you answer that? Can you say what you, I think it's a good point. Would you define for me how you see, what your role is?
I don't know what my role is anymore. I'll be totally honest with you, man. I feel very conflicted about that question. The role I want to have is a person curiously exploring his political and intellectual interests in political peacetime.
That was Ezra Klein speaking to Ta-Nehisi Coates, the famous author. We see the parallels, right? Ezra Klein sees his ideal role as someone curiously exploring how to make the world a better place in a world where there's an overlapping consensus on the fundamentals of our system. I think that's what he means by political peacetime. It's striking to me how well this clip tracks with the feeling coming from all sorts of institutional liberals since the 2024 election. Total dejection, confusion about what their role even is anymore, because it seems like nobody wants what they're selling. And what are they selling? Liberalism, not as an ideology committed to liberty, equality, and self-government, but liberalism as the pursuit of a value-neutral, overlapping consensus. Here's Ezra Klein again.
Right wing.
I just think in many ways we were not practicing politics.
Okay.
We're doing something else.
But now I'm going to pull us up from the mire of political tactics.
Okay.
To the...
I think these are political principles.
They're political principles, but there is a broader vista.
This was right after a discussion of why the sometimes standoffish and insular nature of progressive politics can be alienating and why debate is so important. I'm not even questioning any of that. I just want to note that when Ross Douthat says, let's move on from tactics to principles, let's move on from how you want to do things to what you believe, Ezra Klein says, these are principles. This is what I believe. And that's fine. But whatever the case was in the 90s, in 2025, the fundamental questions of politics are under discussion again, and liberalism needs an answer to these questions that goes beyond just process, beyond the pursuit of the overlapping consensus. Consensus liberalism had its time, and it's dead now. And I think Ezra Klein knows that. Here's another clip from the Ross Douthat interview.
I've been a bit obsessed with this speech J.D. Vance gave at the Claremont Institute, where part of the speech was him taking aim at the sort of creedal America. And Vance says, that he prefers attaching belonging to whether your ancestors were here in the Civil War than whether or not you believed in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that's one level of the fight. And
I'm just going to say I think that slightly simplifies what he was.
So just first of all, Ross Douthat is wrong here. This is 100% what J.D. Vance was saying. I know the speech that Ezra Klein's talking about here, and he's describing it accurately. J.D. Vance gave a speech at the Claremont Institute, which is a think tank associated with the kind of politics you might expect from the Vances and the Stephen Millers of the world. And in it, he explicitly rejects any definition of what America is that has to do with ideals, in part because this definition might apply to, and this is a quote from him, a lot of people that ADL would label domestic extremists as bad Americans. Vance, of course, thinks this is an absurdity because those domestic extremists have ancestors that were here at the time of the Revolutionary War. He is straightforwardly advocating for an ancestry-based definition of what a good American is. I just wish some journalists would take the time to ask him which domestic extremists specifically he was talking about here. Here's another example of how the fundamentals of American life are being debated right now from a speech that Senator Eric Schmidt delivered at the National Conservatism Conference.
The Continental Army's soldiers dying of frostbite at Valley Forge. The Pilgrims struggling to survive in the hard winter soil of Plymouth. The pioneers striking out from Missouri for the wild and dangerous frontier. The outnumbered Kentucky settlers repelling wave after wave of Indian war band attacks from beyond the stockade walls. all of them would be astonished to hear that they were only fighting for a proposition.
It's so interesting that he uses the word proposition here. Let me dwell on that for a second. Do you remember what Ezra Klein said about J.D. Vance's speech? J.D. uses the formulation of creedal America when he's trying to say that what an American is should be based on ancestry and not values. So when I heard Senator Schmidt use the word proposition instead of saying creedal, or even the more common right-wing shibboleth of America is not an idea, it stuck out to me. Where else has the word proposition been used to define America before? Who is Senator Schmidt arguing with here whenever he says that America is not a proposition? Only the most famous interpretation of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence ever written, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This text, this interpretation of what America is fundamentally about, has been considered so important, so integral for so long that it's printed alongside the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution in this little book I have from 1936. I could go on like this for an hour with different examples. The Republican staffers that are now openly admiring Hitler. The Vice President of the United States has on multiple occasions declared that he's influenced by a guy who thinks that America should be a monarchy and that the world needs a dark enlightenment, because the actual enlightenment, the intellectual and cultural movement that gave us self-government and human rights, is bad exactly because it made people more free. These guys hate that the United States is a product of Enlightenment liberalism, and so you often see them described as post-liberals because they want the world to move on from liberalism. And just to be absolutely clear, when I say move on from liberalism, I don't mean be slightly less woke. I mean no more liberal democracy. I don't even really like using the term post-liberal because I think it gets the direction exactly backwards. These people want something that's pre-liberal, pre-enlightenment. Instead of liberty, we'll have conformity. Instead of equality, we'll have hierarchy. We'll be a society of pastoral peasants who all know their place. That's what the illiberal right promises. That's their idea of America. Consensus liberalism is dead because the radical right has a reactionary agenda to remake America. In Eric Schmidt's words,
For decades, the mainstream consensus on the left and the right alike seemed to be that America itself was just an idea, a vehicle for global liberalism. We were told that the entire meaning of America boiled down to a few lines in a poem on the Statue of Liberty and 5 words about equality in the Declaration of Independence.
make no mistake, what they believe in is just an idea too. It's a bad one that's been defeated over and over again, but it's just an idea. And because American liberals have for so long valued the management of consensus over the promotion of actual liberal values, there's no ideology, no cohesive alternative vision to oppose the anti-liberals with as they attempt to roll back the last couple hundred years. That needs to change. Towards the end of the Doubt interview, he starts asking Klein basically what the point of liberalism is. What's the end that Ezra Klein is aiming towards? And I was struck how unwilling Ezra Klein was to describe what he's aiming for in moral terms.
I want you to say something utopian about the future that you think progressives should be.
I believe technology can dramatically transform human life for the better. Dramatically. I think it can make possible ways of living. I think it can solve problems that we take as completely inevitable and totally for granted. I think that we should be able to deliver dramatic changes to public infrastructure quickly. So the big, dramatic, ambitious thing I want to say is that the future does not need to be like the present.
Ezra Klein is asked here what the utopian vision is that the progressive political movement can aim towards, and he says that technology can make the world a better place. I do not think that this is a utopian political goal. I don't know if it's a political goal at all. It's optimistic, which I appreciate. I also think technology can make the world a better place, but it's also a perfect representation of how the moral content has been scooped out of liberalism and replaced with a morally neutral feeling technocracy. This answer doesn't really satisfy Ross Douthat either. Later in the interview, he asked this question, which is much more to the point.
You need something else in the horizon besides saying we're going to be inclusive and we're going to get rich together with flying cars. You need to say so that we can live in some specific way that we are supposed to live. What is that way, Ezra Klein? How then shall we live?
My friend, I am a liberal. I actually believe in creating a space for liberal individual flourishing of different kinds.
The fact that Ezra Klein equates his dismissal of questions about what a good life is with liberalism is such a problem. Liberalism is about more than getting rich together with flying cars. It is. We can say that. It's okay. First and foremost, liberalism is about liberty, freedom. One of the reasons that freedom is good is because it enables people to get rich together with flying cars, but it's also just good. I'd want to be free whether or not I had a flying car. Liberalism is also about equality, the idea that all people are created equal. An equal society would allow more people to become flying car mechanics, maybe, but I also like equality for its own sake. Liberalism also believes in self-government. Maybe a dictator could regiment our lives in such a way that we could create flying cars faster. But if you asked me if I wanted a flying car or to live in a democratic republic, I'd tell you that I like walking. People care about more than just material things. People want meaning. People want purpose. Liberalism wants people to be free to pursue happiness, but it also isn't totally neutral on questions of what a good life is. John Stuart Mill, a great contributor to liberalism, said that it's better to be a sad person than a happy pig. Why? If the pig has all of its material needs met, infinite slop, whatever pigs want, it's better to be a human because humans have the capacity for higher forms of happiness. So much of what we see from the online right, especially these days, is essentially an appeal to piggishness, low pleasure, base instincts. And despite this, so many of them aren't even happy. They're black-pilled. And what's the point of being a pig if you're not even a happy pig? They might watch people who sell them a somewhat happy pig-like lifestyle of pointless self-indulgence, but it's not a lifestyle that the average viewer could ever reach. Only so many people can hawk online courses. Only so many people can get rich crypto rug pulling. And there are only so many booths in the Miami clubs. Liberals in the Enlightenment era asked people to be personally enlightened, to use their capacity for reason, to work to improve themselves, to be virtuous. Immanuel Kant called the Enlightenment man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. And this wasn't just figurative language referring to all of humanity or something. He was referring to individual people. He called people who refused to use their capacity for reason lazy and cowardly. Liberalism does generally believe that people should be free to go about their lives however they want, but liberalism is also not silent about what the characteristics of a good life might be. Liberalism also cares about community. In France, they cared about it so much that they added a fraternity to the liberty and equality. This feels like an aspect of the good life that liberals like Klein should be absolutely emphasizing in an era where community feels like something that's unattainable for so many people. Enlightenment era liberals also knew that the success of a democratic republic depended on people and the country becoming better over time, and that these two things were actually inseparable. This is what founding father Benjamin Rush said in 1787. Patriots and heroes, come forward. Your country demands your services. Philosophers and friends to mankind, come forward. Your country demands your studies and speculations. Lovers of peace and order who declined taking part in the late war, come forward. Your country forgives your timidity and demands your influence and advice. Hear her proclaiming in sighs and groans in her governments, in her finances, in her trade, in her manufactures, in her morals, and in her manners. The revolution is not over.
I don't think that we lack stories. I don't think we lack that vision. I know we are not as rooted in religious faith as you would prefer us to be. I think our failures have been elsewhere.
So to address more fully the clip that I started this video with, what are we even talking about here? Liberalism is so desperate for a story, a vision of the future worth aiming for, that when Ezra Klein's book Abundance was released, it immediately became a focal point of the ongoing fight within the Democratic Party about which story we should be telling. Should we be talking about billionaires? Should we be trying to moderate culturally or otherwise? Should we be talking about authoritarianism? Should we be talking about how to make the government better at delivering for people? So on and so forth. Stories aren't optional. Values aren't optional. They're essential. People don't vote on data alone. People vote on stories. The right has a story, an ideology, a culture. Liberalism used to have this, and for as long as we don't, the right is going to be pushing on an open door. Liberal journalists love talking about calling balls and strikes. Why do we see ourselves as the umpire? We can't keep going on like we have, pretending that the essence of liberalism is avoiding ideological conflict in an era where there is a reactionary ideology out there trying to tear down everything that we believe in. I don't want to do too much discourse on abundance here. The internet's seen enough of it, and it's really just turned into another round of relitigating the 2016 primary, mostly between people who have not read the book. I think it's really important to build more housing, and to the extent that abundance would do that, sounds great to me. But you know what the best part of that book was? It wasn't the research policy section. It wasn't the anecdotes about affordable housing in California. It wasn't any of the data or the charts. That was interesting, but it's nothing that I couldn't get from think tank websites and columns by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. The best part of the book was the very beginning, when the book lays out this almost utopian vision of the future. This part of the book has been made fun of by so many people, so I don't expect everyone to agree with me here, but I loved it. Some of it is absurd whenever you think about it for more than 5 seconds. It's not my perfect utopia, but for one brief, fantastic moment, I saw a vision of the future that wasn't just please consult the chart or triangulated or obsessed with polling or message tested, and I loved it. I think Ezra Klein is wrong to minimize the necessity of a good story for the Democratic Party, for liberalism. I think a good story is essential. Good policy is important, but it's worthless unless you can sell it. Go look at a graph of partisan sentiment on the economy, see how it totally flips depending on which party holds power, and tell me that voters are making decisions based on which economic policy is technocratically correct. Did the Republican Party flip their position on tariffs because they looked at the data and decided to become protectionists? Absolutely not. They flipped on tariffs because they bought into Trump's story about how trade is part of foreign exploitation. The policy is part of the story. Ezra Klein knows this. I've heard him say something similar. There are so many stories that liberals could tell about our vision for America. I'm not here to tell you exactly what policy positions to stake out. You want to be an economic populist? Fine, be my guest. You want to be an abundance guy? Give it a try, have at it. My personal litmus test has 3 parts. First is a simple recognition of the fact that we are facing down a right-wing ideology that says America is no place for people that believe in liberty and equality. Second is a belief in the liberal and American values of liberty, equality, and self-government for their own sake, and not just because they create a smooth playing surface for policy wonks. Third is a demonstrated willingness to defend these ideals. When I went to a No Kings protest in my town on the 18th, I saw a lot of people out there who believe in liberal values. They weren't naive about our country's past or present, but they believed in the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, and they believed in the future. I believe that there's a lot of people out there waiting for someone to speak to a moral core of liberalism that the consensus liberals have let sit dormant for so long. The base for a reinvigoration of liberalism exists. It's there. And of course, we can't resurrect the past. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it doesn't get much more traditionally liberal than a No Kings protest. And it's trivially easy to create the connection between the liberal values of liberty, equality, and self-government and an argument against an ideology that wants America to be less free, less equal, and governed less by the people and more by an oligarchic alliance of business and right-wing political interests. People are sick of the actual capitulation from elite liberals. How many examples do we have of media people or law firms or ostensibly liberal business leaders kowtowing to the Trump administration? People are sick of that. But people are also sick of the moral capitulation of consensus liberalism. We can win this, but only if liberalism can become something more than a nervous defense of the status quo, and only if we can remember together that we have it in our power to begin the world over again. As a bit of a PS here, this video is about a very specific problem I see in modern American liberalism. But I want to be clear, I like Ezra Klein. I listened to almost every episode of his podcast. I've followed his work for a long time. Ezra Klein is a force for good in American politics. So in the spirit of being clear that this is an attempt to make American liberalism better and not to participate in needless friendly fire, I've brought on my fellow YouTuber Aidan Hall, and we're going to both say something nice about Ezra Klein. He has a fantastic YouTube channel. Absolutely go check it out and subscribe to him. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aidan Hall. I run a political-ish YouTube channel. Started around a year ago. We cover the future of the Republican and Democratic parties and the rise of the Supreme Court and other related topics. If you find that at all interesting, you should check me out. But I'm excited to be here.
Aidan has a great YouTube channel. You should absolutely go watch all of his videos and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. So, as you know, I just, you haven't seen the script, but I've told you what this video is about. And it's mostly about a critique of modern American liberalism through the lens of some things that I've seen from Ezra Klein. But the point that I'm trying to make at the end of this video is that I don't see Ezra Klein as like a force for evil in the world. I think Ezra Klein and I would probably agree on almost everything, you know, in terms of substantive policy decisions that you could make. And so what I want to do at the end here is have us both say one nice thing about Ezra Klein, because I know that you like Ezra Klein, and I have
do.
gotten some significant value from Ezra Klein over the years. And so, I don't want this video to be taken in a in a bad faith way. So I know you've got something. Let's hear it.
Yeah, well, I'm honored to be part of the feel good segment of the video. I would say my one thing that I like about Ezra Klein, one of the things I like about Ezra Klein, is that he thinks through positions that he's taking with his audience as he's forming them, which I think is rare for political commentators in the space right now.
That's so interesting. What exactly? So whenever you say he thinks through them with his audience, you mean like he's thinking like he's explaining things how he thinks his audience would understand them?
I think so. I think he's pretty honest and out there. You kind of see it in a few of his recent clips where he's very open about this idea that he doesn't know what his place is in the party in sort of the larger conversation.
Yeah.
And that I think that gives context to the people who are listening to him and maybe the people who are critiquing him a little bit, that there is an earnestness to why he's maybe taking certain positions.
Yeah.
And sort of giving you context to like where he's coming from in a way that like reads to me at least as like honest and upfront, whether or not you agree with the substance or like the vibe of it, I guess.
Yeah, and that's, I think I know what clip you're talking about, because it's one of the ones that I'm using in this video, where he's talking about how he doesn't know what his place is in the party. And I think that is honest. And I think that's a good point. I think it is good to be honest with your audience like that whenever you're trying to figure out what exactly your place is in American politics, in journalism, in the Democratic Party. I think there's a lot of things that I like about Ezra Klein, honestly. I mean, but the thing that came to mind for me whenever I was trying to pick one was that I really appreciate, and this is sort of related to what you said actually, is how upfront Ezra Klein has been in taking some positions that were for the time unpopular but necessary. And so what comes to mind off the top of my head is whenever Ezra Klein was one of the first people that was pushing for Biden to drop out. He was definitely one of the biggest voices. And I think that was the right decision. I think even in hindsight, it was the right decision to have Biden drop out. I think if Biden didn't drop out, it would have been worse for the Democrats. And so I applaud him for that, because I'm sure that was a really hard position to take at the time, because he was in the minority at that time. I think another example that comes to mind is he was encouraging the Democratic Party to shut the government down in the current government shutdown that we're in, and I think that was the right decision too. I think that was the right decision, and I know that he has a lot of sway with voters, but I also know a lot of politicians watch him too, and the fact that he's willing to come out and say these things that have risk, he is willing to take risks on things. And that's something that I appreciate.
I think you could almost argue it's why he has the sway. Like those two pieces are connected, right? Like I don't know. I've known about Ezra for a while. I assume you have too, because we operate in this space. But it seems to me like he has a lot more prominence, at least in the last like year or so, because of positions that he took on Biden dropping out, and we'll see what happens with the shutdown here. But it almost seems like those are the things that like kind of gave him major like institutional clout in a way he didn't have before. And I think it's part of why people are talking about him so much right now.
I agree. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing a little feel-good segment with me, Aidan. Everyone, please go check out his channel. I really love it. There's some great videos on there. Your recent video about the Supreme Court was awesome. Everyone,
oh, thank you so much.
Go subscribe. Okay. Thanks so much.
I really appreciate it, Ryan.
Okay, that's actually the end. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much to my channel members. If you really liked what I had to say in this video and you want to support me so I can continue doing it and you can get your name in the credits of my future videos, please consider becoming a channel member. Don't forget to like the video, comment, subscribe, share with a friend. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.